Awesome. So with that, I do want to introduce our guest presenters. So Dale Ford, she's a graduate at the Guelph University. She's Master Gardener of the Horticulture Program. And she's an avid regenerative gardener and member of the Edmonton Native Plant Society. As well as we have Abby Hennenberry, who is an amazing kindergarten teacher at Lois E. Hole Elementary School. And she actively promotes teaching the next generation and getting outdoors and learning about the environment and being responsible stewards of our land. So with that, I will hand it off to Dale and Abby to kick off your presentation.
Hi, welcome to our presentation. So the first thing we're going to start with was, I always get what exactly is pollination. And basically it's the defined by the process where the pollen moves from the male to the female. And there's numerous different pollinators that we have in Alberta. It's a very, very important process though. Okay, and the reason why it's important is about 90% of all flowering plants require pollination from animals. Okay, and pollinators are really essential for a lot of crops like apples. We were just talking about apples or vegetables, nuts, and a lot of native plants really, really rely on it. Okay, without pollination, ecosystems can completely destabilize. And again, a lot of these pictures I've taken are local pollinators. So this is a northern crescent butterfly that I've taken that was just hanging out in my greenhouse pollinating some huckleberries. And again, pollination for agricultural production is massive. So if you're discussing food or if you like to eat or like to drink wine, it's a pillar of crop production. Okay. Now, some vectors can be wind, like corn is wind pollinated, but most things are not. Okay. Pollinators include moths, hoverflies, birds, bees, bats, thrips, beetles, wasps, lots of different pollinators. So now I always get into, well, what about the honeybee? Because everyone always asks me, well, bees are in danger. Is it the honeybee? The honeybee really isn't the problem, although the honeybee has faced some different threats. For example, different fungicides that were used in the blueberry crops in BC, or mites, or some viruses. But in the end, when we talk about pollinators that are really in danger, it's lots of times it's the native bees. And we have over 375. That's just last count. I'm sure if you talk to the Alberta native bees, which I've included the link, that they would tell you they probably found a few more. The fact of the matter is we didn't really pay a lot of attention to this before. And if you want to identify things, there's lots of things online that are coming up. Like, yeah, there's the Bumblebee Atlas at the Xerces Society. These are all really good identifiers. But in the end, the honeybee is like a domesticated cattle in a way, and the native bees are kind of like caribou or elk or moose. No one's protecting the native bees. And like I said, there's an app for that. And again, these are, look at this bumblebee butt. It's always so funny how they're so cute. But anyway, I use iNaturalist a lot. And what's great about iNaturalist is there's a lot of people on there from various universities that do studies. And with climate change, I'm actually ending up recording some of the most northern sightings of various pollinators and insects. And again, Alberta Native Bee Council has a lot of places, a lot of online resources. And what I find really good about both of these sources is that you will actually sometimes end up talking to an actual entomologist or someone doing a PhD on the subject, because they'll say, hey, where were you? At what time can I use this in my study? And they're tracking these things, which is really interesting. So let's get back to bees and pollinators. Again, we talked about fruits and nuts and veggies. And quite often you'll find the healthiest food for human beings is pollinated by bees. Okay, so 70 out of the top 100 top human food crops, you know, about 90% of the world's nutrition is thanks to bees being pollinator, or some other ones. Like we like to say bees because bees tend to be the most efficient. But I mean, there are butterflies and again, like bats and things like that. But 90%. So if you think about the importance here, imagine the cost of food if 90% of the world's nutrition lost its pollinator, lost its vector to grow. And I like to, when I'm talking with kids, try not to scare them with this stuff because it's really easy to get anxiety up into people when, you're faced with figures like that. So there's a lot of nice resources online. For example, Kids Nature Heroes, bee identification, and little books, again, from Nature Alberta, which is how you approach this subject without really getting kids over anxious about it. And again, for the adults to say why it's important again is basically it's the foundation of terrestrial ecosystems. And if they disappear, we don't know what's going to happen to that ecosystem. Diversity is basically nature's insurance policy. Okay. And if we're talking about nature and the importance of nature and the importance of nature and teaching this to students, is over half of the global GDP is strongly dependent on nature. So again, this is a huge topic, massive ramifications, but you want to focus on the positive, okay? And bees not only pollinate crops, but also native plants, provide food and habitat for wildlife. So if everything's connected, we're all connected to each other. And bees are the foundation of a lot of our nature that we have out there. And again, the Provincial Monitoring Program for Native Bee Council, I've sent you the link as well. Now, if we're talking about money-wise, the honeybee is worth basically provides $7 billion a year. Okay. And that's most of that's in pollination. Honey production is just hit 100 million. So really the value of bees is in their pollination and their ability to help us grow the food we need to survive and live. And again, beekeepers take care of them. And again, let's learn entomology. Entomology Society of Alberta. They can help you if people will say, well, how can you tell the difference between a honeybee and a bumblebee and what type of bee is this and that? Go to these other agencies that are really actively involved. And again, here's a nice little yellow banded bumblebee pollinating. So can honeybees and native bees coexist? Yes, they do coexist. The problem is native bees don't have anyone babysitting them and taking care of them. And they tend to get outcompeted. If you just drop let's say a beekeeper drops a whole whack of beehives in an area to maybe pollinate a hay crop or a canola or whatever, the local native bees are now having to compete with all of a sudden a lot of other people that have come into there. But if you're able to actually get the honeybees and the native bees to stay, we actually know, for example, study on sunflowers, pollination rates were not only enhanced, but they went up by 5 times. That's 5 times over just honeybees, because you know what, really, honeybees only have so much capacity. And I signed up for the Penn State beekeeping course during COVID and found out, you know what, it's a lot of work. Those hives can be 100 pounds. So imagine you're a farmer or now you have to be a beekeeper too, right? So the solution to this is what we did at Lois Hole School, which is you plant pollinator strips. And in fact, in England, they're actually taking a 4-foot section right down the middle of a crop and planting it up with native plants. And that really supports the native bees. And they're finding that they're actually, that land that they lost, they're gaining more yield out of that acreage anyway. They're not losing anything. They're actually gaining yield. So what if we have no native pollinators? Again, we were just talking about that. Farmers would have, well, first of all, you lose a lot of really interesting and great native plants, which help other things like birds and bears, etc. Then you have a lot of things with, like, focus on food. Farmers would face a lot higher crops to grow, costs to grow these crops. So that means we're going to pay a lot higher costs for food. You're going to have shortages. And there's a lot of great studies out, really recent studies that they say, hey, look, native pollinators provide a free service, and it's really important to us. And we need to provide more habitat to wild pollinators. And again, macroeconomic costs. The costs are actually staggering. And if we lose native pollinators, you create a massive problem for food security, especially in areas where agriculture is a large portion of the economy. So, and here's an example from real life. The World's Pear Capital, they produced Asian pears, and by 2016, they had so little pollinators, and even with honeybees, they couldn't pollinate the crops. So they actually had to hand pollinate. So humans had to climb ladders and pollinate. And they're doing this today. Okay. So imagine the cost of apples or pears in Canada if we have to now pay someone to climb a ladder and pollinate them all. It would make the food prohibitively expensive. So if that happens, childhood would be remarkably transformed, and not for the better. And it also, it really jeopardizes a sustainable future for children. So that's why it's important they get involved, because they're the ones who inherit the future. Well, who knows with medical technology, but probably in 50 years, I won't be around. But the kids that are born today will be. And this is actually considered pollinators and food security, and falls under the Children's Right to a Safe, Clean, Healthy, and Sustainable Environment from the United Nations. So they're actually looking at pollinator loss and food insecurity as human rights issue. Again, why it's so important. And again, insect pollination to the world, basically what they say is the value of the insect pollination is 10% of what anyone produces food worldwide. Okay. Now these are Euro numbers. This 10% doesn't include things like hay crops, natural vegetation for people like who the impact of like hunting if the food disappears for certain animals. That doesn't even factor that in. If you factor in things like cattle and horses, obviously the cost is much higher. They were just really looking at food production. And again, I connect with all these studies and these slides for people if you're really interested. And again, the reason why it's important for the future is that crop yield will decline, which means you need more agricultural land, which means the price of land goes up, meaning where do people live in the future? And again, the overview of bee pollination and economic value for crop production, 2001. That's a newer study. So why are pollinators in decline? Well, basically, insecticide use is probably the #1 reason. #2 is agricultural intensification. 3 is introduced pathogens, and 4 is climate change. Now, these go up and down, but these are the top 4 reasons why our pollinators are in decline. But generally speaking, a lot of people aren't focusing on this. And there is a pollinator protection pledge that people can take at the Dixie Society. And again, this is just a moth on my flea bane in St. Albert. So it shows you a lot of different pollinators are. So what about Canada? Well, that's, some people say it's $2.8 million what these native pollinators bring to the table right now, and they do it for free. And what's really interesting is that $2.8 billion actually I can't even talk now, actually presents feeding 24 million people. That's massive. Now, the good news is, rather than focusing on the negative, is that if we improve pollinator habitat, or if we restore them, or if we save what we have, you're actually going to see an increase of being able to feed another 30 million people. And we'll add $3 billion to farmers' income. So I have a bunch of relatives who are farmers, so yeah, they can go and trying to get them more money too. And this is a new study that's just come out of UBC. UBC is really paying a lot of attention to this, but I think we can all agree that, you know, being able to feed more people is better than feeding less. The other thing is that when the UBC study came out, they found that the prairies are actually the most affected by pollinator decline. Since we're in Alberta and since we live in Edmonton, that's us. Okay. And again, Saskatchewan and Alberta, we need to protect our ability to produce food. And if we lose native pollinators, we really destabilize our terrestrial ecosystem, and we're producing less nutritious food. It's costing us, I don't know how many times more. And, you know, honeybees sometimes have bad winters. We can't rely on just one creature to do this business. And again, Edmonton area land resources for kids are there to help ID pollinators, because some people see, especially kids, you know, if they don't know what pollinators do. And of course, we're not, you know, generally told that before we get to school. They might be afraid, oh, it's a bug, it's this, it's that. So what we do is you got to teach kids that, no, that's not your bug. That is your dinner. That thing helps produce that pumpkin you want to carve at Halloween. That produces the apple for your apple pie. You've got to show them the value, and that's what we really focus on. And quite frankly, it's a life form that we should be trying to protect. Again, Edmonton Area Land Trust has resources just for kids, and they're great. And again, so we tell the kids, you know, what can I do? What can we do to stop this? Well, it's really important to focus on what we can do to fix it, to go for the hope, to say, you know what, there are things you can do. Every single person can do, every kid can do. And the first one is to get rid of the synthetic chemicals you're using on your lawn. Plant native plants to attract good insects and pollinators. And we teach integrated pest management through attraction of good bugs or good insects at the lowest hole using a pollinator strip. So they actually get to see the good bugs in action. They can go outside, they can calculate, they can look at things with magnifying glass. And then we go into, again, native plants. Native plants are probably one of the easiest ways to attract and take care of native pollinators. After you quit spraying, I tell people, you know, if you're going to focus on native plants, it's even more important to not be, you know, using mosquito flogging in your neighborhood or in especially in your yard, because it's kind of acting like a roach motel. So I've included some really great eye candy, violets and all native plants. Again, buffalo bean. I just love the pretty pictures of the eye candy of the butterflies. So, but these again, they're all pollinators. Fleabanes are really good for attracting bees and other insects. And summer blooms. Okay. And in late summer, one of the easiest plants you can plant is asters. This really helps all pollinators. Goldenrod is another one, which is a very late bloomer, and it's actually considered a keystone species, meaning that it's foundational to support the life of other creatures in the environment. Planting native grasses is another one. Bumblebees love to nest at the bottom of them. And of course, if you like birds, right? So little blue stem is, so instead of buying blue fescue or not, well, you know, pampas grass or things like that, pick a native grass. We have tons of them. And again, I included identifying bumblebees. So if you plant this, probably they'll find it and they'll dig in the ground under it, where they'll come out in the spring, and you can take a picture of them, and you can look, trust tips. Another really important thing which we're trying to do right now is create a wildlife corridor, which means connecting these native spaces up so they can work with each other. For example, a mourning cloak can only go 10 to 50 meters before having to stop. So you can imagine if this butterfly is flying around, it needs food, it needs to stop. It can't go very far. So silvery blues are even worse. They only go about 20 meters per day. So if you have one great big garden that's a pollinator strip, that's great. But it's great for, generally speaking, the studies have said, for a few species will colonize that area and they'll do quite well. That's a good thing. But smaller but more gardens equals more diversity, biodiversity. So what we did is we had the kids plant gardens at their home on private land. So we create these butterfly steps all through Erin Ridge. And there's actually a program out of Richmond, and the David Suzuki Foundation is working with this. It's called Butterfly Rangers for Kids, and they can actually register their little pollinator garden online. And again, Lois Hole, we have a massive pollinator strip. This strip actually works to help support Coal Mine Park's pollinator garden. And then together with all these little stepping stones all through the neighborhood, that really supports the biodiversity in Erin Ridge. So again, how do we talk to kids about this? I believe we should talk openly, but you approach the issue in such a way with a positive, like, yeah, we're going to go out and help the bees. We're going to go out and do something positive. We're going to go be creative. We're going to be immersed in nature. We're going to see how important things are. And the reason we do this is kids are the critical agents of change. They can change the future. They can fix the future. And the future really is theirs. So all the studies have said contact with nature is a very crucial part of sustainability and education and just care. It helps develop appreciation for nature, for the earth, for being stewards, and including all the inhabitants. So being out in nature has actually been shown to help kids communicate with each other and appreciate each other. And the best way to do this is through play and creativity. And even I have this little Alberta Native Bee Council. They actually have coloring pages online that, you know, kids can learn to identify these by using them as coloring books. Everyone knows who Ariel is. Well, they should know who a green sweat bee is, right? And they actually produce these things and they're free to use. So, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Abby because Abby is actually the teacher who works with the kids every day. I pop in every now and then, and Abby works with them every day. So Abby, take it away.
Dale, I'd appreciate it if you'd stay on. I'll say next when the next slide comes on. I want to say thank you for being invited to this. A lot of what Dale has said is things that I will be slightly repetitious with, but also expand on. In addition to being a teacher at Lois Hole, I sit on the executive committee for an organization through the Alberta Teachers Association called the Global Environmental and Outdoor Education Council. And everything Dale said, I can reiterate and add to about children being in nature. You can't protect something you don't understand. And if you don't understand what's going on outdoors, you can't really know how to do anything about protecting it. So that's one of the baseline reasons for us going outside all the time. I also just returned from something called the Outdoor Learning Conference, the second annual conference that had over 450 delegates from all across the country and internationally, run by an organization called Take Me Outside. I would encourage anybody on this webinar to either look them up yourselves or to encourage others to look them up, because they promote all of what we're talking about with outdoor education, not just for children, but for adults as well. Behind me, if you can see it on my wall, is something I borrowed from a photographer named Jason Leo Bantle. And this also highlights what Dale said about children's position and the United Nations take on this. And it says, respect nature. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. And I truly believe that and live that every day with how we do things and teach in our classroom. I put up this poem. It's by Nicolette Souter, who does an awful lot of work with outdoor education. And if you have read it, it's beautiful. And this is why we go outside, play in the dirt, and pick up worms and put them back. Make sure we talk about that. We always talk about things like don't pull Mother Nature's hair, don't harm her parts. But may we raise children who love the unloved things, the dandelion, the worms, and spiderlings, children who sense the rose needs the thorn and run into rain-swept days the same way they turn toward the sun. And when they're grown and someone has to speak for those who have no voice, may they draw upon that wilder bond, those days of tending tender things, and be the ones. And that's basically what we try to do in kindergarten and build that from the ground up so that we have sensitive children all the way through elementary, junior high, and high school. And that is one of our kids with a worm in their hand. The number of children who come running to the front door in the morning with their mothers aghast and they've got dirt and worms in their hands. I have to show Mrs. Henneberry. She'll just love it. And I'm glad that they feel that way as long as they put them back. Okay, Dale, the next slide. So one of the things that I was encouraged to do was look into National Geographic's explorer mindset philosophy. And that is a lot of what we do in our classroom based on curiosity. We're explorers and discoverers, facilitated by our teachers, supported by our parents, and the ideas come from the children. So curiosity is the pillar that drives our classroom experiences. And we know it's impossible to try to get a 5-year-old to understand what's going on the other side of the world. That's just not within their capacity. But if you get outside in your own environment, and then you can tell them about how other people have environments of their own, that begins to build a baseline for their understanding. So we talk about human concerns at age-appropriate levels, and I could agree more with what Dale said about not instilling fear. In fact, the GEOC, that's the group I belong to, I also co-edit their journal, Connections. We have 2 articles this month or this year coming up on eco-anxiety. And if parents and adults are upset and suffering from eco-anxiety, you know what's going through to children, even if it's not verbally expressed. So we really expose children to foster that curiosity and inquiry, because meaningful hands-on learning in their immediate environment is what creates opportunities to build responsible global citizens. So what we have here, several years ago, we had a successful vegetable garden, and the kids were amazed to go out and pull a carrot that actually had the green part stuck to it and didn't have it brought down to a 3-inch and 1 centimeter cylinder that had been cleaned up and put in a bag. A lot of children didn't even realize this is what a real carrot looked like. And over on the left, that's children going and looking for dandelions in a field on Aaron Ridge Drive. They were excited to see what dandelion blooms look like in various stages of development. Okay, Dale, next slide. So we go out on daily walks in our classroom, and it's interesting. We now have a program called Nature Gnomes Come Knocking. We were finding that our Division II students were not getting out. That's the grades 4, 5s, and 6s. Lois Hole is built as 2 levels. Not all schools are built as 2 levels, but we know that the curricular requirements and assessments become much more stringent as we go up in the grades. And these teachers are having a very difficult time finding ways to get their kids outside, do meaningful things while also meeting the requirements of their curriculum. So we've been noticed as going outside every day, and people started asking questions. So what we've started doing is going upstairs and dragging people outside. And there's an article on that in the journal coming up, but we get them engaged in things that they can help us learn. And then we find the older students, when inspired by the younger ones, really want to get outside. And older kids change completely when they get to be the older person around a little person. The dynamic changes for the better. So we go on daily walks. Every day we leave about 9:20. We go outside for anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half to sometimes an hour and 45 minutes. Today was an absolutely beautiful day, and we observed bees in apple trees, bees in crabapple trees, and bees in dandelions. And we had magnifying glasses out, and the kids were having a blast. We're very lucky where we are, but so is just about everyone in St. Albert. When there are people in Toronto at this conference I was at talking about how they do nature studies in the concrete courtyard of the office building their daycare facility is in, then I think we have a plethora of things that we can capitalize on here in St. Albert and Red Deer, Calgary, all over Alberta. So in our immediate area, we have our pollinator strip and garden and just our schoolyard, but we also have stormwater management facilities, coal mine forest, coal mine trail, Erin Ridge Ravine, Ted Hole Park, Erin Ridge Park, and our general neighborhood. And we are always discovering things outdoors. The posters you see were ways that kids could see what their footprint was on the earth and how they could make a difference. One used words, one was just pictures. So those who can't write yet feel that they can participate just as validly. Next slide, Dale. So this was just an idea. If you've got to make it fun and kids see another reason they can connect with to make the learning meaningful. And there's nothing better than paint and a butterfly to try to help them understand that what they saw outside is something they can have a hand in creating and understanding. So every year we do this project. They have their own shapes. They pick their colors. We study symmetry and math. We look at videos. So we're listening, and we have observation skills at work. And also we do a little bit of writing and storytelling about what we've done. Next slide, Dale. So our school does have this dedicated strip of garden space at the front of the property. It's dedicated to pollinator-friendly plants. We do have some raised beds, which were just planted by the grade 2 class today. The woman walking around in the background is the EA who's in that classroom, and I can vouch for the fact they spent hours out there, and so can she, planting carrots, beets, onions, all sorts of things. And then they looked at our pollinator strip, which you can see on the right on the screen. That was last year. We were devastated by the drought. We don't have an established watering system, and thistles are absolutely drought resistant. They took over. So when we started the garden, everyone really wanted to see pretty plants. We had roses and we had poppies, we had all kinds of things in there. And that's when Dale came on scene, and we started talking about the fact that those plants are great. They take a great deal of care if they're not native to the area. And as we progressed, we learned that the prettiest plants weren't necessarily the best ones for native pollinators or as sustainable. So we expanded our outlook and challenged our aesthetic. If you could go to the next slide, Dale. So we began to see some success with a mixture of plants to attract pollinators. These were some of the things that were growing in our garden, and some of them were recommended by Dale to purchase, and some were recommended to plant. And we like all of our colors, which is important. Kids need to see visible growth. After just beginning to study this, that's okay, go ahead, Dale. After just beginning to study the variety of native pollinators who could frequent our garden, preparations for planting were completely halted by the onset of the first wave of the pandemic. This really put a wrench in our plans. And as we were scrambling for meaningful experiences to inspire the kids, one of my EAs and I began biking to kids' houses to deliver learning materials to keep the interest in pollinators alive. We found some great resources with things they could cut and glue, and then also go out and find things. I had kids sending me videos and pictures online with Google Classroom, and we were out in the rain with umbrellas trying to video ourselves, and then we were getting them to send videos back of what they found in their neighborhoods. But these little packets, the one you see at the door, had ladybugs, hummingbirds, bees, butterflies, all kinds of worksheet things they could do, scavenger hunt things they could do, trying to keep them engaged in going outside. Now we don't have to do that, fortunately. We're back in school, but a lot of those materials are still useful, especially when we do things with other classes. Next slide. By the way, biking St. Albert, you may not think it's very hilly until you have to go on a bike. So with Dale's expert guidance and wealth of knowledge, at the end of that pandemic year, we put together packages of vegetables and herbs and flowers to attract pollinators. The seeds were packaged in 2 different Ziploc bags. There was a green bag and a yellow bag. And we had the idea that we would photograph these lists. We sent them home in the envelope with the kids, but we mixed all the seeds together. So what the children had to do was use this picture as a legend, and they had to sort the seeds. So that was a bit of math. It was also a bit of language. They learned to read the names of these things. And I didn't bother with the pictures, but we photographed every seed packet or information online to give them so they would know how to plant these seeds. We didn't just send home seeds and say, here you go, put them outside and wait for things to happen. As Dale mentioned, one of the things that we really wanted to create in Erin Ridge, and we're fortunate because most everybody who goes to Lois Hole lives close by, with the distribution of houses, we were creating small pollinator gardens that these pollinators could go from yard to yard to yard in survivable distances. We told people it was fine to plant in a container on your porch. It was fine to plant in a container in your backyard or in the ground in your backyard. We talked about various ways they could do that. And this way, we sort of imagined that all of these creatures would be hopping from place to place, and that would be sustainable. They wouldn't be starving. That wouldn't be a problem. Next slide, Dale. So there we were again. I didn't get to delete that picture, but we had again gone out with our packets. This little fellow on the right was very, very excited. We made a plant stake, which is at the back, out of a butterfly. I sent those home with directions because we couldn't do it together, but he planted sunflowers. And this is his father sending me on his cell phone an update of what was going on since we couldn't meet in class to see it. And that face represents the excitement when little kids get to put something in the ground and see it grow and keep it, and then talk about how that's going to help the earth and their world and their environment. They're pretty excited about it. So let's see if I missed anything. Nope. No. And I think, again, understanding nutrition in the food chain is important so that they understand they are a part of it. Next slide. Maintaining contact with the families did become a challenge during the pandemic, but here's Tucker again. His plants are growing a little bit more, and they transplanted these plants when they moved that summer. So keeping up with things, if you get 5 out of 25 children who've done this properly, the hope is that they tell 5 relatives and that everybody starts to do it and that this project grows. Next slide, Dale. So moving ahead, the main thing I believe, and I think most teachers who are involved in this do, this all begins with fostering awareness one step at a time. We can't go and give the big facts Dale was giving or all of our anxieties about what's going on with pollinator decimation. But we start with small things like short walks. We are now up to 4.5 kilometer walks in the neighborhood that started with just going to the back of the schoolyard. And we observe potential pollinator habitats and appreciate how far they travel by talking about that every time we go out. We talked about things, this won't be in the slides, but we talked about things like not raking your yard too soon in the spring or leaving the leaves in your yard in the fall. It's not very popular when the aesthetic is pretty much the same in a neighborhood. But if one person tells another person, have a good example of that. My husband is a veteran. He goes to a veterans coffee group, and he brought up the fact that we don't rake leaves, and he brought down an onslaught of criticism. And he said, no, my wife is a teacher and she's telling her kids' families to do this. And if you want to know what, you can look that up online. So I thought that was kind of neat that it was spreading upward as well as downward. So when we go outside, we adopt a leave no trace practice. We don't pick things. I have people sending me great little craft ideas all the time with dandelions as lion's manes and all sorts of things. And it's like, nope, we can't use that. We leave everything where it is as if we weren't there. We also employ a group called Teacher's Pet. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but they bring what's called an in-class field trip to us. They bring the supplies to build things. They create awareness of bees with building bee houses. Now, I know those aren't always the best things to have, but what they do is expand our knowledge of the different types of bees that we can attract and their importance in the ecosystem as well. Grant McEwen has a great program where students will come out to classrooms and explain many different topics related to pollinators. And I didn't put her name in here, but there is a professor there who is more than willing. And if you contact their department of biology, you'll be sure to be able to find people who want to come out. We built those age-appropriate bee houses, and we will be doing that every year because it's also an incredible fine motor exercise for young children to build bird houses later on and all sorts of other things. Next slide, Dale. So one thing that we do, it may seem quite unrelated, but this does keep the interest going. Puzzles, toys, drawing, painting, crafting. We do movement games. We do physical games related to insects, and all of this increases children's interest and perspective on pollinator existence and their needs. The more we can put this out in front of them, the more they relate to the needs. Next slide, Dale. One of the things we do every year also is acquire painted lady caterpillars and watch their metamorphosis as they become butterflies. And this makes the fragility and the strength of the life cycle more apparent to kids. We have never had an entire supply of those caterpillars survive. And it's a very terrifying and upsetting thing to some of the kids when they see that these caterpillars don't make it. But it's also realistic, and it's palatable and understandable when it's gently introduced. However, most years we end up with what you see on the screen. There was only one year that we let them out and didn't notice all the birds waiting in the tree, and the birds swooped down as soon as we released our pollinators, which is a sad fact, but it also happens in life. These are our painted ladies on 2 different occasions, 2 different years, and we have about 6 caterpillars getting ready to make their chrysalises now for the same thing. So anything you can do. We don't encourage children to go out and collect their own because they're disturbing a natural habitat. So we wait for something that's cultivated for us to use. Next slide, Dale. So staying current, and I'm sorry, there's an editing problem up there, saying current. I guess you could say we're saying current too, but we participated in real-time initiatives in the community, planting like Dale's project or the city's project that Dale's working with at Coal Mine. It's right next to our school. We go by it every single time we go there. We know that we don't walk on it. We know that we observe it almost every other week to see what's changed in it. And the children are appreciating that that's not a place that you trample, and neither should any place be in Coal Mine Park. There's signage up about that now that didn't used to be there. We were very proud to have participated in the citywide pollinator-themed trash can decorating project this year. And interestingly, all 3 winners of the contest were kindergarten classes. Kindergartens really got into the pollinators. So what that suggested to me was we must be doing a fairly good job of getting the information out there to kids. They're interested enough, teachers are interested enough, and we've got a good baseline starting with 5- and 6-year-olds. This year, our handprint masterpiece was called "The Solutions Are at Our Fingertips, Their Fate is in Our Hands." And the kids have gotten really good at telling their parents what to do and not to do with nature in the environment. So we don't catch bugs. In fact, a side note on this, the journal that I helped edit, we had 3 articles come in that talked about how to catch bugs and study them, like put duct tape on the tree and watch the insects crawl over it. And we had to edit a lot of that out because we're trying to introduce humane study of animals. It might mean that you have to chase around a lot more with a magnifying glass, but ultimately that's better for everybody. Next slide, Dale. So we're ready for next steps with community involvement in our school's backyard, Coal Mine Park, and we also invite community involvement with our school pollinator strip development. And I've got an editing problem up there that should be fixed as well. But our pollinator strip really did suffer with the drought, and then we need to look at new watering. But I know that we have some things out there that are thriving. There's some grasses out there. There's yarrow. There are a few other things that seem quite drought resistant. So we're looking for anyone in our school community, parents or the city, who would be interested in coming and helping with this as a potential extension of the Coal Mine pollinator strip. And I'm not sure if there's another slide or not, Dale.
No, well done, Abby.
At the end. So there's so much to say. I really pared this down and think, oh my goodness, I'm sure I left gaps and holes in this. But butterfly rangers, I agree with Dale. That is something that would be really good for anyone to get involved in. There's a lot of support with a big group through that. If anyone is interested in the Explorer Mindset through National Geographic, anyone can do that course. It's free, and you end up with a global community of educators and non-educators interested in exploration, discovery, and conservation. So the only other thing I would say is that the school district and possibly some other places, we do have a lot of local Indigenous knowledge keepers who come to see us, and that is really important to link with all of this.
No, I definitely agree as well. All right, so we have a few moments for questions. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll stay online for a couple of minutes or so. I say you covered off, yeah, a lot really well. So it was a
Thanks.
really good presentation, you ladies.
Like in there.
Let me stop the recording.